Hey, come see us on tour. We'll be in Tempe, Arizona, Los Angeles, Columbus, Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, Cincinnati, Lexington, Burbank, California, and Honolulu. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for those tickets. Don't go anywhere else. Hey, guess what? Another crazy conspiracy theory is proven true. This is from CBS News. Federal court rules against EPA, that's the Environmental Protection Agency, in a lawsuit over fluoride in the water. Guess which side the EPA's on? The ruling by District Court Judge Edward Chen, an appointee of former President Barack Obama, deals a blow to public health groups in the growing debate about whether the benefits of continuing to add fluoride to the water supply outweighs its risks. I didn't even know there were risks. I didn't even know that. They didn't even tell me that there was. They never ever told me there was even risks. And they didn't tell me that they were making some kind of computation of the benefits over the risks. No one ever told me that. Environmental nonprofit Food and Water Watch and a handful of anti-fluoride groups like the Fluoride Action Network have been in court for nearly a decade after the EPA denied their petition against local water utilities adding in the mineral being fluoride. Hey, remember when Alex Jones made that offensive remark about how they put chemicals in the water to make frogs gay? Well, he was wrong. They put chemicals in the water to make your kids stupid. That's what it seems like they're doing. Get this. While Chen was careful to say that's the judge, he was careful to say that his ruling does not conclude with certainty that fluoridated water is injurious to public health. He said that evidence of its potential risk was now enough to warrant forcing the EPA to take action. In all, there is substantial and scientifically credible evidence establishing that fluoride poses a risk to human health. It is associated with a reduction in the IQ of children and is hazardous at dosages that are far too close to fluoride levels in the drinking water of the United States. That's what the judge said. The Barack Obama appointed judge said that. Now be careful adding that fluoride. Not so much. What the hell do kids need IQ for anyway? We have TikTok. Am I right? Come on. The judge's ruling cites a review by the National Institutes of Health's toxicology program finalized last month, which concluded that higher levels of fluoride is now linked to lowered IQ in children. So fluoride doesn't so much protect your teeth as it does make you so stupid you stop caring about your teeth. The American Academy of Pediatrics has questioned the validity of the NIH's report. Probably because, it couldn't be because they're being paid off by some fluoride company, could it? I don't know. Saying other reviews have come to different conclusions about fluoride's risks and benefits. Hey, I don't want any risks. I didn't even know there were risks. The AAP is among the expert groups that continue to recommend using fluoride toothpaste. I bet they recommend your 10th booster also. In combination with fluoridated water to protect teeth from cavities. Man, I better not hear lead paint turns out to be good for you, or I'm going to drink a big glass of fluoride. Still, even after the ruling, many fluoridation supporters are not backing down. Much of the medical establishment supports the process, just like they support your 10th booster. In a statement last week, and they support giving kid a hepatitis vaccine the moment he's born. In a statement last week, the American Dental Association, which supports fluoridation, said this: the key takeaway for the public and public health community from this ruling is that it does not conclude with any certainty that fluoridated water is injurious to public health. Cooper pointed to get this, you're not going to believe this. A statement made by an American Pediatric Association official said during the court case in which she said she would not oppose fluoridation even if it reduced 5 IQ points for up to 10% of the population. So it's kind of on par with huffing glue. That's what I see. So basically 4 out of 5 doctors use fluoride. I'm going to go to the fifth doctor. The vast majority of the public was always on our side. There was never citizens who said, yes, please give us fluoridated water. The shift in part picked up momentum as scientists like Linda Birnbaum, a former head of the EPA's toxic chemicals program, she came out in support of ending fluoridation. And some government agencies over the last several years found unreasonable risk. Let me say this. So this woman who used to be in charge of the EPA's toxic chemicals program came out in support of ending fluoridation. What was she doing when she was in charge? Why did she wait till she's not in charge? Anyway, so the EPA's safe drinking water standard. So let me bring in our guest who is a lawyer on this case before we get to the rest of the story. Michael Connett is here. He's a partner at Syrian Glimstad LLP with extensive civil litigation experience in both the personal injury and regulatory arenas. His civil practice is focused on obtaining justice for individuals harmed by corporate negligence, misguided medical practices, and overreaching government mandates. Recently, he served as lead attorney in a precedent-setting case that resulted in a federal court ordering the EPA to eliminate the unreasonable risk posed by fluoridation of drinking water. Welcome to the show, Michael Connett.
Thank you, Jimmy. It's great to be here.
Thanks for your work. Thanks for doing this. How long have you been working on this?
Well, I'm a bit embarrassed to say, Jimmy, that I have been working on this issue for 24 years.
Wow.
But this court case I've been working on for 7.5 years.
7.5 years. Wow. Yes. That's so let me just give a little bit more information on this, because this has all been mind-blowing to me. And this story, I think, was recommended by some of our fans or people in the chat, and they said we should bring you on. The EPA's safe drinking water standard, you're not going to believe this, for fluoride is 4 parts per million. And it's based on a risk assessment that the EPA did in the 1980s, where the agency selected crippling skeletal fluorosis as the one and only health effect of fluoride exposure that we needed to protect against. Hey, what's a little crippling skeletal fluorosis when you can flash that bright, shiny smile? Am I right? Come on, huh? Mike, could you explain this?
I can, Jimmy, and it is very hard to believe. But I explored this in depth in the depositions in this case, because I had an opportunity to depose EPA officials to explore the basis for this safety standard that they issued, as you said, in the 1980s. And the one and only health effect that they protected against for fluoride exposure is, as you said, crippling skeletal fluorosis. As the name implies, this is a crippling condition where your entire vertebrae is fused together. You have nerve compression, severe pain. It's a systemic poisoning of the body, okay? Now, as you might suspect, crippling fluorosis is not the first and most sensitive effect of fluoride exposure.
So what you're saying is there's a gradual process that ends up in crippling skeletal fluorosis. You don't just wake up one day and have it, right?
That's exactly right. And we've known that since the 1930s. There were studies done of workers poisoned by fluoride in the workplace. And these studies found that after a few years with moderate exposure, they have arthritic type symptoms, the kind of chronic joint pain that you see in arthritis. And if you keep exposing them to more fluoride, they become progressively stiffer and in more pain and ultimately crippled. EPA knew, Jimmy, in the 1980s, there was no dispute that you have these various clinical stages of skeletal fluorosis. They knew that in the early stages of this condition, you have arthritic pain, you have calcification of the ligaments, you even have osteosclerosis and sometimes osteoporosis of the bones. That was not in dispute in the 1980s. And yet, EPA only selected the final stage of this condition, the crippling stage of this condition. And Jimmy, under oath, in this case with EPA officials, I got admissions that, yes, they did not consider chronic joint pain caused by fluoride to be an adverse health effect. That unless you were crippled, you were not harmed by fluoride exposure. It sounds kind of nuts, but that is the basis of the fluoride safety standard.
So here it says, according to the EPA, unless and until you have crippling fluorosis, you have not been harmed by fluoride exposure. It sounds crazy, but that's the EPA's position. That's their position. So,
and look, you look at the definition there for crippling fluorosis.
Here it is.
Limitation of joint movement, calcification of ligaments, calcification of the neck vertebrae column, crippling deformities of the spine and major joints, muscle wasting, neurologic defects, and compression of the spinal cord. That is what crippling fluorosis is.
And that's caused by fluoride exposure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's no dispute about that. It's been known since the 30s that fluoride causes this condition.
So the Twilight Zone irony is that if you get that, you can't even brush your teeth. Right? So what's this? Tell people what this is.
This is a condition called severe dental fluorosis because fluoride doesn't just affect the bones, it affects the teeth. And here, this is the most advanced form of fluorosis, which is a mineralization disorder of the teeth caused by excess fluoride exposure during childhood. And EPA knew, Jimmy, there was no dispute whatsoever, none, that at the so-called safety level for fluoride, which is 4 parts per million, many children would develop this condition of severe dental fluorosis. It's marked by excess porosity of the enamel, meaning it's a under-mineralized enamel that is prone to pitting and crumbling. And it's also marked by extensive black and brown staining of the enamel. The EPA determined that this condition is not an adverse health effect. So they allowed kids to develop this condition under the so-called safety standard.
So you're telling me that children, just from drinking tap water that has been fluoridated, some children develop this condition?
Well, at the safety level, which is 4 parts per million, to be clear, that's higher than the so-called optimal level that we add to water for fluoridation, which is now at 0.7. It used to be 1 part per million. Now it's 0.7. But at 4 parts per million, many kids, in fact, up to 40% of children, according to EPA's own data, up to 48% of children drinking water at the safe level, the maximum safe level, will develop this condition of severe dental fluorosis. Now, some children, Jimmy, but a small number, about 1% or so of kids in fluoridated areas get this condition. But it's not, as many kids as at the 4 part per million safe level.
So you're saying 1% of kids get this?
That, according to the national data from the CDC, about 1% of American children now have, in some, it could be 1 to 3%, but in that range of children now have some form of severe dental fluorosis.
I never even heard of this. Those teeth aren't just white. Those are Walter White teeth, if you know what I'm talking about. Come on. So I'm going to play. Now, these are some of the videos that you took during depositions of. These are EPA. This is an EPA official, and I can't remember. Let's play it so we can find out what the question is that you asked. Let's listen.
When you first started working at EPA in the 1990s, the EPA did not believe it would be an adverse health effect for a child to develop extensive pitting of the enamel as a result of fluoride exposure, right?
Based on what they wrote at that time.
Okay. And the EPA did not believe it would be an adverse health effect for a person to suffer chronic joint pain from fluoride exposure so long as they were not crippled, right?
by the definition of crippling skeletal fluorosis, one can, again, based on what was written, it would appear they did not.
So what she just said there was she's admitting that we didn't consider anything else a safety risk from fluoride except the crippling skeletal fluorosis. That's what she's just saying there, right? She's saying she's agreeing with your accusation, right?
That's right. And this is Dr. Joyce Donahue, who is a senior scientist in the Office of Water, and she is EPA's main subject matter expert on fluoride at the Office of Water. So she knows what she's talking about.
So she doesn't look embarrassed. Do you think she is embarrassed, or do you think she has any qualms whatsoever with the question you asked her and her answer?
There were times during the deposition where she was uncomfortable. In fact, I asked her at one point whether she would agree that the MCLG, the safe level, is a crude standard. And the body language when she answered that question, I think, showed that she was quite uncomfortable with the fact that as we sit here today, this remains the safety standard for fluoride in the United States.
So I wish you would have asked her, do you think you could possibly show less concern about possibly poisoning all of the children? I would like to see her answer to that question. Could you show less concern? Because that was unbelievable lack of concern. This is the head scientist who's supposed to be concerned about children's health. That is okay. So here's another one. So who is this person?
This is Dr. Edward Ohanian, and he was intimately involved, Jimmy, in the 1980s with establishing the safety standard. And in this deposition, he was appearing as the representative for the EPA in the litigation. It's called a 30B6 deposition, which basically means he is literally the EPA embodied in a human being speaking. So what he says is the testimony of the agency.
Okay, so let's listen to your question and his answer.
EPA has defined stage 2 skeletal fluorosis as characterized by sporadic pain, stiffness of the joints, and osteosclerosis of the pelvis and spine, calcification of the ligaments, and at times osteoporosis of the long bones, correct?
Correct.
And as we discussed earlier, EPA did not consider stage 2 skeletal fluorosis to be an adverse health effect when it established the MCLG in 1985, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So again, explain to me what just happened there.
So I asked him about an earlier stage of skeletal fluorosis, because as we've been discussing, this is a bone disease that has various stages of severity, crippling being the most severe. Stage 2 skeletal fluorosis is the stage that precedes the crippling stage, okay? And it is marked by calcification of the ligaments, joint pain, joint stiffness, osteosclerosis, and in some patients, osteoporosis. And he just testified there, Jimmy, that EPA did not consider that to be an adverse health effect.
Why would this be? Why would they not consider that? What is in it for these scientists at the EPA to be so pro fluoride and to say something that seems so scandalous and just be okay with it? What is going on? What am I missing?
Well, there's a long story there, but I would say that it is a matter of public record with documents to demonstrate it, that the EPA was under intense pressure from the American Dental Association, from various dental organizations, as well as the dental agencies within the federal government, within the Centers for Disease Control, and the Surgeon General's office at the time, who were all saw their roles as promoting fluoridation, not as being neutral umpires to determine what the science says about the risks of fluoride. They saw their role as, We need to promote this policy because it's good for kids' teeth. And so the EPA was under tremendous pressure to not do anything that would in any way impede the promotion of water fluoridation. And so the dental lobby at that time was concerned that even calling fluoride a contaminant in drinking water, even regulating fluoride as a contaminant in drinking water would cast a shadow on the policy of fluoridation. And so they lobbied very aggressively to get the EPA to not set a low level, to not issue a protective standard against some of the risks, because they didn't want the public to view this as a chemical which has an extremely small margin of safety, where the toxic effects occur at levels very close to the so-called optimal levels. And so EPA was responding to and ultimately kowtowed to the political pressure.
Why was there is there money in fluoride?
There has been money in fluoride and for a long time, and there's a long story there, which is a very interesting one. If you go back to the beginning of this policy, the United States started experimenting with water fluoridation programs in the 1940s. The largest manufacturing industries in this country, the aluminum industry, the steel industry, the industries associated with the bomb program, chemical industries and fertilizer industries, all had very substantial liabilities with fluoride pollution. They were poisoning their workers with excess fluoride, which is how we learned about this bone disease of skeletal fluorosis. They were poisoning downwind and downstream communities with air pollution and water pollution with fluoride. Fluoride actually caused more damage claims against industry in the United States between 1950 and 1970 than the top 20 air pollutants combined. And it's a little, so when most people think about fluoride, they think about, white-coated dentists and toothpaste. They think about their teeth. They think about it as being something harmless and good, right? But there's a larger picture to the fluoride history. And while those industries are not very, they're not involved today in fluoride politics, their impact on our understanding of fluoride by funding many studies that helped form the basis of our knowledge today of how fluoride affects human health, those early studies kind of corrupted, you can say, the foundation upon which our fluoride policies were based. And there are other industries which we can talk about, including the sugar industry, which from the very beginning of this fluoridation policy was promoting fluoride as a way of sort of like, don't deal with our sugar problem with kids, drinking too much soda and eating too much sugary foods. Don't focus on that. Focus on this magic little chemical fluoride that can solve the cavity problem without cutting back on, the soda in your schools.
That makes sense. That makes sense. The sugar industry is evil. They got everybody to be afraid of fat and not sugar. Anyway, there's one more. So who is this?
This is Dr. William Hersey, who was the president of the EPA's Union of Scientists at the headquarters of the Washington, D.C. office for EPA. He was a longtime scientist at EPA, and he became involved in the 1980s. Him and other scientists at the EPA became involved and very concerned about fluoride when they saw what the agency was doing with the safety standard.
So you're saying this guy actually was concerned about it?
Yes, he was concerned about it. And one of the things that's remarkable here is Dr. Hersey and the EPA union were so concerned about this standard, the safety standard. They tried everything that they could do to get the attention of the agency to change course. And after being denied time and again to have the agency do anything, they actually tried to join a lawsuit filed by the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, a lawsuit that the NRDC filed against the EPA for this safety standard. The EPA's own scientists tried to sue their bosses about this standard because they thought it was that crude and unsafe.
Wow. So is the standard right now that you can put up to 4 parts per million fluoride in water? Is that the safety standard that they set in the 80s? Am I wrong about that?
You can have in your water supply up to 4 parts per million without doing anything about it.
That's crazy.
That doesn't mean that no community, Jimmy, will add fluoride, like intentionally add fluoride to water at that level.
Why?
But what's that?
I mean, if the EPA says it's okay, why wouldn't they?
Well, because it's so obviously hazardous that no one in their right minds would ever want to add 4 parts per million to their water. It's like such a bad idea. But nevertheless, according to the EPA, that is a safe level. And it's important, Jimmy, to know that that safety standard doesn't just influence, the water level regulation, the water regulations. It influences regulations for fluoride pesticides in terms of how much fluoride people can get from pesticides without it being a problem. It influences all of our occupational safety standards for fluoride. So by having a very high safety standard for water, it waters down every regulation that you could ever have on fluoride.
So here's your question to him and his answer. This was a little shocking to me when I heard it, but here we go.
Do you have any opinion based on what you learned about fluoride as to whether crippling skeletal fluorosis is appropriately considered the most sensitive effect of fluoride exposure?
Yes, I do have an opinion, and it's not the most sensitive effect.
And what do you base that on?
A plethora of research on effects on other tissues beside connective tissue, especially on the developing brain.
What if we just limit the question to the skeleton, the bones? Do you think crippling skeletal fluorosis is appropriately considered the most sensitive skeletal effect of fluoride?
Joshin Foundation.
Now, common sense says it can't be. I mean, you don't wake up one day and your spine is fused. I mean, there are aches and pains that develop as your connective tissue becomes more and more calcified, more and more inflexible. And those kinds of arthritic type symptoms clearly are adverse health effects. So, yeah, it's crippling. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly your spine is fused and say, oops, I had too much fluoride.
And you don't wake up one morning and just start defending fluoride either, unless someone paid you to do so. So that guy he's on your side. He's basically supporting what you're saying, that you just don't wake up one day. So you can't, and that the standard that the EPA actually has is crazy and outrageous.
That's right. Dr. Hersey and the EPA headquarters union ultimately issued a position against water fluoridation, stating that the toxicology literature showed that this is an unsafe policy that could cause harm in a number of ways. So EPA scientists have for a long time, or at least the Union of Scientists has for a long time been on the record as opposing water fluoridation.
Wow. I didn't know any of this stuff. And so here's a guy who tries to make a joke about it. Let's watch.
Going back to the press release or the mock press release that you wrote, the last...
Do you want to tell us who this is?
Yes. So this is Paul Price, and he was the scientist at the EPA that actually wrote the standard. He wrote the safety standard that was published in the Federal Register, where the EPA had to articulate how severe dental fluorosis is not an adverse health effect and that crippling skeletal fluorosis is appropriately considered the most sensitive effect of fluoride exposure. This is the guy who had the unenviable duty of articulating that in a regulation. Okay. And so but Jimmy, one of the things that he did that the public was not privy to at the time is right around when he published the safety standard, he circulated a mock press release to scientists at the Office of Water, where he said that under the safety standard, kids will have teeth, quote, gross enough to gag a maggot. And he utterly lampooned the standard that he just wrote himself and that the EPA published in the Federal Register. So here in this clip, I'm asking him about one excerpt from the mock press release that he circulated to his colleagues.
Okay, here we go.
The sentence of it reads, EPA selected this level based upon a cost-effectiveness study which showed that it is cheaper for people to keep their mouths shut than to remove the fluoride. That's what you wrote, right?
That's correct.
And what did you mean by it's cheaper for people to keep their mouths shut than to remove the fluoride?
I meant to be funny.
That's because it's harder to brush your teeth with your mouth shut, I guess. I like to start every morning by brushing my face. But anyway, so what do you think? Well, I really don't even understand that joke. Well, can you explain to me what he was trying to do with that?
What he was referring to at that time, because the EPA knew that children who have deformed teeth, black teeth that are crumbling and pitted, that's going to have an effect on their self-esteem. It's going to have an effect on their social psychological development, because there's a lot of research to show that if children are embarrassed about their teeth, about their smile, about their physical appearance, it can have a lot of effects on their emotional development. And so the EPA actually commissioned an analysis by the National Institute of Mental Health to ask them, are kids at risk of psychosocial problems if they have severe dental fluorosis? And they concluded, yes, they are. And the EPA said, well, thank you very much, but we're still going to say it's not an adverse health effect. So here the joke is, it's cheaper to keep your mouth shut than to remove the fluoride. Just pointing to just the embarrassment that kids would have by having this disfiguring condition.
That it seems a psychopathic level of disconnect and lack of concern for those kids that are being damaged. Am I wrong about that? It seems like that guy's displaying a psychopathic lack of concern.
Well, it's certainly the kids who have this condition, it's a very difficult condition to have as a kid. Imagine being in high school and trying to go out on a date and you open your mouth and you have the teeth that we looked at earlier. I mean, that's, it's a very challenging condition for a kid to have.
So there was a drug that they would give to mothers, and I don't know if they gave it to their children or the mothers took it when they were pregnant, but the baby's teeth would be grayed, and that they got rid of this drug in the 60s. Do you know the drug I'm talking about?
Not offhand, no.
I have a couple of my siblings had that. And so they had gray teeth. And of course it affected them psychologically. And so a couple of them went to get, as adults, we were poor, so we couldn't afford to.
Was it tetracycline, an antibiotic used to treat infections?
Maybe.
Yeah, tetracycline was a common cause of gray teeth in children and pregnant women in the 60s.
Yes, that's right. And so that happened to a couple of my siblings who are older than me. And they went out, now as adults, they could get their teeth capped or whatever, so they could but it, well, there's a lot of psychological, I'm sure damage done up until that point. You know what I mean?
And
Go ahead.
One important point here is that, and this is may surprise you, but there are upwards of 70% of children in the United States that have dental fluorosis. Now, it's not as severe, Jimmy, as the severe fluorosis, okay? Because that's still a relatively rare condition. But up to 70% of children, according to the CDC's national health statistics, have some form of dental fluorosis. It's usually milder, but you can see it. If you ever see a child that has snow-capped front teeth, so they have on both of their front upper teeth, there's a cloudy splotches, okay? That's dental fluorosis. That means that child had too much fluoride when their teeth were developing. But you can also have fluorosis on other teeth. But when you see a splotchy look on the teeth, like white specks and splotches, that's often dental fluorosis. Now, when we started the fluoridation program in the 40s, public health officials were aware that fluoride causes fluorosis. And the goal was to limit it to only 10% of kids getting any form of the condition. 10%. And we are now at a situation where you have 70% of kids in this country that have dental fluorosis. So it's far, far higher than was considered acceptable when we started this program. And this is a reflection of the fact that the United States is the most fluoridated nation on earth. Over half of the people that have fluoride chemicals added to their water live here in the US, because most of the world does not add fluoride chemicals to their water, including the vast majority of Europe. So here in the United States, we have so many cities adding fluoride to the water, and it's not just the water, it gets into all the processed foods and processed beverages made with the water. So we have a real overexposure problem to fluoride here in the US.
So does fluoride affect your pineal gland?
Yes, there is animal research, like pretty compelling animal research, that shows that. So the pineal gland is this gland between the two hemispheres of the brain, and it's not protected by the blood-brain barrier, and it has a very high perfusion rate of blood. And it also has, and this is where it gets particularly problematic for fluoride, it also has calcified tissue in the gland. So like hydroxyapatite, the same stuff that our teeth are made of. It has basically hydroxyapatite sand pebbles, if you will, in the pineal gland. And the fluoride, it's been demonstrated in humans that fluoride accumulates in the hydroxyapatite of the pineal gland to extremely high levels. The highest levels found in the human body have been found in the pineal gland. And this is of concern because the pineal gland regulates the hormone melatonin, which is really important for good health in a number of ways. So there is concern that the accumulation of fluoride in the pineal gland could affect melatonin regulation in the body. And there's animal research that has found that, yes, animals exposed to elevated fluoride had disrupted melatonin regulation.
So do you drink tap water? Do you have your kids drink tap water? What do you drink?
I do not drink tap water. Thankfully, I live close to a spring, and I just get spring water, which I put in the 5-gallon jugs.
Okay. This is very troubling. I can't believe it's taken this long. And thanks for, somebody like you to bring this. So what do you see going forward? I mean, there are people who are fighting you on this, even though now a judge, and a Barack Obama appointed judge, agrees with you, even though the former head of the EPA division that deals with this now agrees with you. There's still people pushing back. They want fluoride in that water. What do you think's going to happen?
Well, what I hope will happen is that the U.S. will follow the lead of Europe and take this out of our water supply, because fluoride, we have fluoride today in so many sources like toothpaste and dental products that everyone can make their own decision to use. Go to the grocery store, it's really cheap, buy a tube of toothpaste, brush it on your teeth and spit it out. That gives everyone a choice about whether they want to use fluoride, and it has the benefit of spitting it out. You're not swallowing the fluoride. That's the approach that Europe has taken. And that's the approach that we now really should take, especially given this more recent science that we haven't discussed, but the more recent science linking fluoride exposure to effects on the brain, including reductions in IQ in children. And when you have a risk like that, it really is hard to justify adding it to your water. When we started this fluoridation program, it was supposed to be about one thing and one thing alone. It was supposed to be about the teeth. Neurotoxicity, effects on the brain was never part of the equation. And now that we know, and at our trial, Jimmy, the experts for the EPA never disputed. Here's an important point. The experts for the EPA never disputed that fluoride is neurotoxic. They never disputed that. They, in fact, agreed that fluoride is a neurotoxicant, that at some level of exposure, fluoride will damage the brain. There was no dispute about that. The only dispute today, as is the case with a number of the health effects with fluoride, is what is that dividing line where you go from safe level to toxic level? And how does that dividing line differ based on anyone's susceptibility, genetics, nutrition, health, and whatnot? So there's no dispute that fluoride is a neurotoxicant. And does it really make sense to be adding a neurotoxicant to drinking water? And I'll add one other important point in considering that, which is when we started fluoridating in the 40s, the belief is you needed to swallow it. You needed to swallow fluoride when you were young. And it incorporates into your teeth and makes your teeth stronger forevermore. And it's now the consensus in the dental literature, including by the CDC, that the predominant benefit, the main benefit of fluoride is topical, when you put it on when it's in contact with the outside of the teeth, not when you swallow it. So now that we know that you don't need to swallow this, why on earth are we still adding it to water? Because the last time I checked, whatever you put in your water, you're going to swallow. And so my hope with this, Jimmy, is that now that the judge has ruled that fluoridation chemicals pose an unreasonable risk to the developing brain, that the EPA will implement a regulation to eliminate that risk. And in fact, that is what the judge has ordered. The judge has ordered the EPA to initiate a rulemaking proceeding to address the unreasonable risk posed by fluoridation. So EPA has a legal duty, a legal obligation to eliminate this risk. Now, in our view, the most obvious way to do that and the most effective way to do that is to stop adding fluoridation chemicals to drinking water, which is precisely what Europe did a long time ago.
So I know a lot of people who watch this show, you had friends who made fun of you, scorned you, slandered you for trying to look into recent matters of health and medicine and, quote, do your own research. I would tell you, don't even bother showing them, those friends, this video, because they probably have used too much fluoride to understand it. I mean, if there was a just world, all those people who made fun of us who were so incurious, they should all be sentenced to actually having to wear tinfoil hats everywhere they go. Are you struggling with back taxes and unfiled returns? The IRS is escalating collections, adding 20,000 new agents, and sending millions of final demand letters in these challenging times. Your best defense is Tax Network USA. Don't let the IRS take advantage of you. With over 14 years of experience, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in back taxes, no matter your tax issue size. Their expertise is your advantage. They specialize in negotiating with the IRS, aiming to reduce your debt significantly. Tax Network USA doesn't just negotiate, they protect your assets from IRS seizures and manage your yearly returns for ongoing compliance. Importantly, they are licensed to help with all state tax issues, regardless of where you live in the United States. The clock is ticking. Don't wait as the IRS steps up its game. Seize control of your financial future now. Contact Tax Network USA for immediate relief and expert guidance. How do you do that? You call 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Jimmy. Don't let tax issues overpower you. Turn to Tax Network USA and find your path to financial peace of mind. Hey, come see us on tour. We'll be in Tempe, Arizona, Los Angeles, Columbus, Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, Cincinnati, Lexington, Burbank, California, and Honolulu. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for those tickets. Don't go anywhere else.